century, citizenship and rights in the new republic became two critical concepts within Latin America. This video will examine the aspects of changes in civil liberties that occurred in Latin America during the 1800s and the early 1900s. We will discuss the social and political changes that arose from liberation, the abolition of slavery, and women's rights.
Latin America faced many social and political changes in the wake of the wars for liberation, shifting countries from colonialism and slavery to more egalitarian and left-leaning politics. We will be looking at Cuba as an example of the changes in rights throughout Latin America during this time period. From 1869 to 1888, drastic changes in citizenship and rights occurred in Cuba. Slavery was abolished in October 1886, which led to former slaves merging with the working class. On the other hand, the wealthy lost their rural properties, causing many of them to join the middle class. In the late 1880s, despite still being under Spanish control, Cuba became increasingly economically dependent on the United States. The Cuban War of Independence finally began in 1895 as a result of the strong dissatisfaction with Spain's corrupt administration of the country, as well as social and economic strains faced by the citizens of Cuba. In 1908, in the aftermath of the war, the Partido Independiente de Cuba was formed, and it was consisted mostly of former African slaves and veterans of the Cuban War of Independence.
The abolition of slavery was a long and complicated process across Latin America. It was made possible partly through the passing of different laws. In 1888, when Brazil, the last Latin American country to do so, passed the Golden Law, which made slavery illegal, it was finally accomplished. Under slavery, freedom of religion was denied to those enslaved. The document, The Fetishist Animism of the Bahian Blacks, by Raimundo Rodriguez, attempts to explain some of this mistreatment. Although belief systems such as fetishism were well established, when people were brought into slavery in the Americas, many were bombarded with the Christian faith and were made to convert. This meant that their own religious practices were suppressed, oftentimes violently. Release from slavery did not guarantee the safety to follow one's religion openly. According to Rodriguez, even freed, former slaves were unable to freely express their belief during the regime of slavery. Being Catholic was one of the many European ideals that remained post-colonialism, along with being white and male.
Within the late 1800s, while Latin America was faced with political, economic, and social changes with emancipation and post-emancipation societies, women began to declare rights to education. In Argentina, for example, feminist Maria Eugenia wrote a text entitled Brushstrokes, from her concerns on the access women had to economic and modern science education. According to Tiffany K. Wayne, Maria wrote targeting for the opportunities to increase the intellectual and economic independence of women, conducting the civic motherhood, that women could be more than mothers. However, while there were women who were claiming independence to education, there were also women against such matters, such as the text written back to Maria Eugenia, entitled Women, dedicated to Maria Eugenia, written by Josefina Belisa de la Sagasta. Josefina was a poet in the 1800s who wrote back to Maria Eugenia, claiming against her arguments, according to Wayne, that women would lose their greatest charms and the poetic prestige of their weakness, arguing it is destiny that women are weaker than men. Two opposing viewpoints of women in the 1800s on what roles women should and shouldn't have. Although today the arguments of women's rights seem rather bizarre to argue, it comes to show how there has been a significant amount of improvement in the rights for women and a change in viewpoint of women since the 1800s.
In the 18th and 19th century, the church and government exercised control over the female body. For example, in the 18th century, the church pinpointed 5 areas of sexual behavior for correction amongst parishioners. To correct sexual behaviors, the clergy supported the placement of regulations that were designed to limit when people of the opposite sex could meet. This was specially directed at lower-class women. In 1876, as a response to Maria Echeniquez's article, Josefina Belisa de Sagasta wrote the article, woman dedicated to Miss Maria Eugenia Echineke, who opposed women's emancipation and believed that it was a private matter that could disturb traditional family structures. Josefina believed in religion and was opposed to anything that might contradict it. Her essay painted women in a powerful light, while simultaneously reducing them as submissive figures within the household. Needless to say, Josefina was heavily influenced by the ideals presented by the Church. She lived by the self-sacrificing standard as an angel of the house. The Church viewed women as temptresses and proposed that female practitioners follow the cult of the Virgin Mary. The Church believed that women must serve as a paradigm of religious devotion. They encouraged love and obedience for the father or husband, and preached that women must perform the role of a faithful, docile servant within the family, and in return they could expect material protection.
The 1800s and the early 1900s was a time of many significant social and political changes in Latin America. The lives of citizens were affected after the introduction of new civil liberties and were impacted by the changes which arose from anti-slavery laws and feminist ideologies, which contradicted the Church. These new changes brought both negative and positive consequences for the lives of the people in Latin America, which can still be observed today.